Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner. I'm your host, Joshua T. Calkins Truberty, also known as Byron of Sidious. Folks, I would recommend that you grab yourself a drink, grab yourself a snack. This is going to be a long one. As I've been promising myself and a few other folks over the last little bit, I am going to be proceeding with this presentation to do a point-by-point literary critique / analysis of Amazon Studios' presentation of Fallout, an adaptation, a live-action adaptation, continuation of the world-building lore and sci-fi video game series known as Fallout. Now, I am not as thoroughly studied and versed in the lore of the games as my friend Cortex, with whom I am engaging in a series of deep dives on his YouTube channel. The deep dives are more of a back and forth discussion about various intellectual properties. Typically, we focus on original productions on YouTube, such as the SCP Foundation lore and mythology, the back rooms, and diving into supernatural, paranormal stories, mythology, and history, and independent artistic projects and presentations. And we're both fans of the Fallout games, though Cortex is far more deeply versed than I am, because he has routinely gone back and replayed the older games that were first created by Interplay and Black Isle Studios, and he's played every single Fallout installment that there is, all the way through to completion, whereas I myself have only played Fallout 1 way back in the day, and then Brotherhood of Steel on the Xbox, and then Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, and I have completed about half of Fallout 4. So my familiarity with the games is not as in-depth and thorough as his is. But I have done supplemental reading into the lore, history of the factions, characters, and world events, enough that I feel comfortable, or felt comfortable, going into this series on Amazon with a critical eye towards narrative technique. And I am going to put forth this clarification, that any bias that I may present in my point-by-point review, notation, and analysis, my bias is from the point of view of a storyteller, a narrative constructor of written material. I'm not an expert in film and television criticism or analysis. That is not my particular wheelhouse most of the time. However, I do occasionally like to indulge in this sort of thoughtful examination of various media. Just as I did with Barbie, I am going to be going through and presenting point-by-point observations, noting either timestamps or kind of general ideas of where within the episode the point that I am reading off of is fitted into the overall story. And I'm going to be going through point by point and reading off the handwritten notes that I filled up these two small notebooks with. Don't be too impressed with the amount of notebook pages that I went through and used, because my handwriting is, one, kind of not great, and for two, it doesn't take long to fill up a page. But I'm going to go through, and bear in mind also that I may stray off and make comparisons based on the note that I'm currently reading and extrapolating into how it fits in later, or what kind of cue or scenario it's set up later on, as well as kind of straying and rambling a little bit here and there. I do apologize for that, but most of these notes, I paused the show in order to write these notes down and these observations. It's part of the reason why it took me nearly 3.5 weeks to watch an 8-episode season, because I like to be thorough and make sure that I get my thoughts and observations written down immediately before I have the chance to forget or lose track of my thoughts. With all of that in mind, let us proceed with Fallout on Amazon, Season 1, Episode 1. A few quick notes to start the show prior to the the title screen prompt and the end as it started. Point 1. The Walton Goggins, portraying an actor known as Cooper in the show, his outfit on the set of this film that he is in the process of starring in, his getup is blue and yellow, Vault-Tec colors. Sure, the televisions are showing black and white in most homes, but Vault-Tec likely had its fingers in popular culture for wartime propaganda, given the setting of the show and the setting of the entirety of the game series. We know, as players of the game, or the game series, that Vault-Tec had their fingers in a lot of pies, and that does get pretty well saturated and becomes well presented throughout the remainder of the series. Point 2, and this is one that Cortex and I have already started our deep dives on the show, and we had a little bit of back and forth on this one. When I read off this note, he pushed back on me a bit, and we had a little bit of mild disagreement. But if you want to know more about those disagreements or points of contention, I would highly recommend tuning in to Cortex G333 on YouTube in order to see the points of contention. Yeah, we do the show on his YouTube channel. Point 2. I have read and heard complaints about wokeness in the intro scene between the neighbors and the actor's kid clearly being mixed race, but I offer a bit of pushback of my own here. In times of international war and tensions, and we're not talking Cold War tensions, we're talking hot war active tensions. You know, the radio report can be overheard in the client's house about Anchorage and the fighting going on there. It's a big reference for fans of the series, especially Fallout 3. National identity and unity tends to trump the normal identity politics of the day, especially in fiction. The Fallout universe is set in a retro-futuristic time scale. In, I think it's 2077 was when the bombs dropped. So it's already in the future of the world that we currently inhabit as real people. But much of the aesthetics and the cultural norms or practices and behaviors seem to stem from a 1940s, 1950s, possibly early 1960s kind of aesthetic. But that doesn't mean that societal and cultural practices would be steeped and remain fixed in that 1940s, 50s, 60s civil strife. Point 3. The opening sequence is brilliantly filmed from start to end. The boxy cameras for civilian use were right out of the Fallout 3 and New Vegas games. And the client dad, when the bombs drop and everyone at the party realizes what's happening, him punching out his neighbor buddy while ushering his family down into their fallout shelter is peak familial protective instinct and resource protection. This guy has been taking care of him and his. He is squared away for the provision and survival of his family unit. He planned for just him and his family. And when the shit hits the fan, no matter how friendly you are with your neighbors, if you try to be too neighborly, you're going to end up screwing yourself in the long run. This is perhaps not an enjoyable sequence of events. It's all filmed in slow motion, and I can commend the showrunners for doing that, just to highlight the immediacy and the intensity of that sequence of events. But no one should be surprised that this is what happens. This husband and father, this client, is ensuring that him and his will survive the day. Introduction to Lucy. Point 1. There is a touch of meta humor and tongue-in-cheek laughs as Lucy is talking to herself to this vault exchange board. She mentions repair, science, and speech skills while doing little visual vignette shots. This put me in mind of the associated skills in the games and the Pip-Boy illustration images that get associated with them. It's a nice, if not quite subtle, nod to the source material, and the fact that they are, in fact, video games with stat blocks. Point 2. On Lucy being a teacher. Kudos to the show's director of photography for using the old world 14-star flag for the United States, though when I first saw it, my first thought was, Enclave! Fuck! But then I remembered, wait, the Enclave insignia had the big E in the middle of the star ring, not the final star. Point 3. The arranged marriage thing, while a little strange for me personally, actually has a lot of historical precedent, and was handled in the pilot episode much as it often was in our own real-world history. Two families, kingdoms, or domains that neighbor each other would exchange spouses and interlock to strengthen themselves and one another through symbiotic bonds of marriage. Point 32, and this was, point number 4, and this was something Cortex and I also covered. Vault 32's people, including Lucy's betrothed boy, Monty, they all struck me as a bit grimy and hardscrabble. This is very curious, and it doesn't escape her brother Norm's notice. But these people have battle scars, neck tattoos, weird hairstyles. The prior overseer had apparently suffered an untimely demise of some sort. I smelled the setup right away, and again, so did Lucy's brother Norm. And Cortex brought up that there were no safety protocols put into place when accepting in people from their neighboring vault. They're not assumed to be outsiders, but one would still imagine that there have to be some safety protocols, such as maybe using your Pip-Boys to scan your incoming neighbors for radiation sickness or for other signs of damage, trauma, or health problems. You don't want to introduce an illness into your tightly controlled, hermetically sealed populace that might be carried over from your neighbors. And when Lucy was asking Monty about his sperm count and other obsessive health-related details and questions, he had no response. This should have sent up some red flags. Point number 5. Lucy shows Monty to their quote-unquote new home in Unit 626. This number, I posit, might not be incidental or accidental. And this is where I am launching into a great deal of conjecture, so apologies if you don't follow immediately. But I am personally fascinated by semiology, the study of symbolism and hidden meaning in text and in fiction. In angelic numerology, the number 626 signifies growth, harmony, and stability. All things one might hope for out of this couple's union, perhaps. But this is fallout. There are no happily ever afters here. And 626 also carries another notation, one that's completely sidebar and possibly has nothing to do with this, but it's also a reference to Lilo and Stitch's Stitch Experiment 626. Hope and family became a very big thing for him. Ohana means family, means no one gets left behind, except these people very much were left behind. But again, obviously no tie there. I'm just going on a bit of a limb for my interpretation purposes. And next point number 6. Norm finds Vault 32's fields fallow. He knew something was up, and he snuck his way out of this little picnic in order to go see for himself if he could follow up his suspicions. And his suspicions turned out to be grievously justified. Sorry about the disruption there. Continuing on with the notation. At 21 minutes, 19 seconds, Lucy can be forgiven not really thinking much about how Monty, her new beau, this was a savage moment, and Cortex and I both had a laugh about this and kind of joked about it a little bit, but it is a very telling moment. But Lucy doesn't really notice that her new husband just wiped his dick off on their window drapes, which is an insanely lowbrow, uncivilized thing to do. But she could be forgiven for not noticing. She is, after all, half asleep. She's in the afterglow of her first experience of coitus. So yeah. The next note I made was shortly after. When she says, "You're from the surface, Raiders." And she scans him with her Pip-Boy, the Geiger counter setting on it, because of the way that he is fascinated with the running water in the sink, the way he turns it on and off and then on again and fills this pitcher. I think it was from the blender or a mixer or something, but he fills this glass container with water and he's drinking from it with both hands on it like a child or a savage, somebody who's never come across clean running water. And finally she recognizes this as something is up. Combine that with all the scars and she finally got wise. But she says Raiders. This was a little bit of a point off for me because A, how come nobody checked the RADS levels on their Pip-Boys when these folks from Vault 32 were coming through? Again, we touched upon that with the complete lack of safety and security protocols. But point B, I had asked, how does Lucy know the term Raiders, never having been on the surface herself? But Cortex pointed out while we were discussing the pilot episode that there would have likely been protocols on instructing people how to contend with if their vault were breached from surface dwellers. So it's very possible this was already a term that she had come across in training manuals of some sort. My next note. The short, brutal fight between Lucy and quote-unquote Monty was harsh yet savagely beautiful. They didn't have Lucy be some badass girl boss from the drop. She got ragdolled around pretty hard, and despite fighting back pretty decently, given her limited training, they had the moment where they were fighting over the knife and it closed in on the two of them, close-up shot, and it zoomed in, and there was that moment of, oh. Now, in most television shows and movies, when the camera pans back and the combatants separate, the quote-unquote bad guy is usually the one who's got the blade sticking out of them. But not this time. In this case, it was Lucy. She had ended up getting stabbed. But primal drive is a hell of a thing, because as she is contending with realizing she's been stabbed, she reaches behind her into the sink for this broken water pitcher or container from the blender, whatever it was. It had just been shown to be used for drinking water, which is a life-giving thing. But it had been busted and was now jagged, and she reaches for it. She grabs it because it happens to be near to hand, and she uses this jagged glass, and in a horrific and gorgeous display of pure survival instinct, she carves into Monty with this pitcher. Now, because of the lighting, or because of the kind of jagged camera angle, it looked to me like she had run it right across his throat. But when he shows up later, obviously that's, proves out not to be quite right. But it definitely looked like a kill shot. And in this moment, whoever was responsible for writing this scene did a brilliant thing in conveying the duality of existence, of life. This glass could be used to convey water to a person, life-giving water. But when it is broken, out of form, out of shape, it can be used to deliver death and damnation. Point number 10, at the 25 minute and 32 second mark, there's an imagery here that's just beautiful. And I think it may have escaped most people's notice if the review videos I've been watching are any indication. And I'm a little shocked that this was not brought up by Shadiversity, but they didn't go into note by note, moment by moment detail like autists, like I'm doing. But not to toot my own horn, but to toot it a little bit. Lucy comes upon a dead priest. The guy who is impaled against the wall is the fellow who performed the wedding ceremony between her and Monty. This displays clearly the brutality, the savagery, the lack of humanity of this group of marauders. And I'll come back to that later on, but clearly they don't care that this man was clearly dressed as a member of clergy, as a man of faith. And it is fitting, too, that he is impaled against the wall, this man of benediction, that he is impaled beside the Vault 33 armory. And what went through my mind was the ecclesiastical phrase, "Come within, child, and be saved." It's more telling, too, that Lucy goes inside and she finds no such salvation except for a tranq dart gun. It's the only non-lethal weapon that was in that armory, more than likely. But it is her only available means of salvation. But this is, just a beautifully shot moment. Next point that I've got. The visual of the 3D projector casting the idyllic world backdrop of the Nebraska skyline and farmland as a backdrop, that devolving into a fiery hellscape as Lucy's world was blown apart. It was a superb twinning to the pre-war world's cataclysm as the nukes rained down. This imagery for me was a little bit on the nose, but it went perfectly with a dash of history not repeating itself. But it does rhyme. It was also nice to see in this moment that some of the Vault 33 dwellers were using their melee training to survive and put up a fight against the Vault 32 raiders. My next point was, during that confrontation, one of the marauders puts a kind of inhalant device in his mouth and takes a shot from it. I don't remember if it was Jet or Psycho, but at the 28 minute and 30 second mark, I couldn't recall which one this marauder was huffing, but he huffed it, and then a few moments later, the vault door immediately cut him in half. This was a tremendously brutal environmental kill. My next point of observation, at the 29 minute and 24 second mark, Monty, the betrothed husband, resurfaces and chokes Lucy, and her father saves her with a swing of a shovel. To be honest, I kind of loved and hated this moment. Monty should have stayed dead, as far as I'm concerned. They should have just used another marauder, and that would have worked fine. But the second shovel hit and then drowning the guy, that to me worked all right, because it expressed the extremes to which even a peaceful vault dweller, if they are a father, if they are a parent, they will go to any length. They will debase themselves in savagery to protect and defend their child. And Hank, as much as it later on turns out he's not a great guy, or he's not portrayed as a good person, but look at how far he's willing to go to save Lucy. And then there was the Moldaver setting up the bomb to go off. We ended up moving into the next section of the episode at the 34-minute mark with the introduction to Maximus. Flesh is weak, steel endures. Yeah, we're only at the 34-minute mark of this first episode, folks, but bear with me. There is obviously a lot of territory to cover. A lot. All right, so picking up where I left off from the last recording. It's been a couple of days, actually, since that last note. And I'm recognizing now that, holy good God, I took a lot of notes. So rather than stopping to comment on each and every single note that I took, I'm just going to straight out read the notes that I have written down for the remainder of at least episode 1 and probably episode 2. I'm not sure going forward, because I don't want this to take forever. You'd almost spend less time just watching the show. And I'm not trying to do that. So anyway, with Maximus. First note I have for Maximus at the 34-minute mark. A young initiate of the Brotherhood of Steel, a paramilitary organization. The opening scene is hefty military vibes, well-done visuals of their flag and the barracks-style longhouses. Next point, at 35 minutes, 23-second mark, Aspirant Maximus. Aspirant is a great title for trainee, linguistically speaking. It speaks to the aspirations of these folks to become members of the Brotherhood of Steel. The ruler whack to the face for an incorrect response in identifying a circuit is actually an excellent detail to work in, to show the hard-nosed discipline and militant rigor of this organization. The scribe's robes, the leather-bound, quote, holy texts, this is showing technical layouts. However, this is also superbly done, and it imbues a sense of monasticism to the order, which is prevalent throughout the games in the source material as well. This is kind of a combination of military and almost religious devotion that this organization has. My next point, we got a first look at a Brotherhood airship and the vertibirds and the T-60 power armors. It was a really good visual spectacle. I'm curious as to why it mattered at this point, but we shall see. The next point that I have, at 38 minutes 40 seconds, roughly, when a pair of ranking officers catch Dane and Maximus in the power armor garage, how was there no immediate rebuke or punishment? There is clear signage out front that states suit pilots and mechanics only. And we saw a scribe instructor dish out a ruler to the face on Maximus for just having an incorrect answer in class. This seems kind of inconsistent. The 39-minute, 15-second mark. Okay, I'm aware that in a military barracks, yes, you're going to get guys who are, quote, working out the poison, but this visual with the grunting and the guy jacking off on, just off screen seemed gratuitous and completely unnecessary. The boot camp here is gruesome to think about, though my actual view of it wasn't great. I was watching on my phone while I was on break at work. It strikes me that right after, with the with the trainers dragging a hooded Maximus off, bound to the wrist, that there is a critical failure of sorts going on here. Either A, the trainers are jumping to conclusions, which seems a bit out of character for a martial or monastic order, or B, the trainers don't realize or know that Maximus and Dane were clearly close friends, or C, someone spotted Maximus having his little hissy fit of jealous baby outrage with the tire stack porta-johns. So either the instructors are absolute crap at their jobs and knowing what's going on in their camp, or Maximus is not a very sympathetic character. At the 41-minute mark, cut back to Vault 33, the 33ers appear to be cleaning up the mess and leavings, covering up the, not covering up, but just trying to move on from the massacre. The opening shot of the blood-spattered good evening flipping over to a clean good morning is a clever visual nod to the notion of putting the past deaths and destruction neatly behind them and moving on to a new day. Like I said, there is some really excellent, clever visual storytelling in this show. At the 43-minute and 20-second mark, I thought a brilliant line from Norm. They don't want to find Dad, he says. If they did, they wouldn't get to be in charge. His character is sharp, observant, and keen. At the moment, he's a minor character, but I like his potential and insight. And one final note on Norm. It was actually nice to have this clearly small, kind of frail character accept and say out loud his key character flaw, because in this case, we already saw it before we were told it. And he tells Lucy that he can't follow her outside because he says, "I'm too chicken." He admits to his own cowardice. We saw this, and this is something that is big in visual storytelling, is show us, don't tell us. They already showed us with the way he scurried around and stayed out of line of sight and out of risk. And now he is telling it straight out. He showed us, and now they're telling us. And that's okay. I don't mind the telling, in this case, because it was preceded by showing. The next note I've got, serious kudos to the blinding light effect as Lucy leaves the vault. This is very much a callback to leaving Vault 101 in Fallout 3. Also, whoever was responsible for the sound design was absolutely crack on, having the crackled tick of the Pip-Boy's Geiger counter quietly going as Lucy evaluates the area just outside the vault entrance. Next point, back to Maximus at the 50-minute mark. And we seem to finally be seeing an actual interrogation about what happened to Dane. By the way, Maximus's honest answer here, when he was asked why he wanted to join the Brotherhood, he says, quote, "To hurt the people who hurt me." That, folks, is resentment and revenge, and should be a huge red flag for a military or monastic order like the Brotherhood of Steel. This little 3 to 4 minute scene was loaded with high tension, and the score and sound effects of the armored knight moving around behind him, heavy, solid, contained potential violence. It lent the whole thing an appropriate degree of menace. It makes the Brotherhood of Steel actually feel like a threat, because they are. Yet I am still left not liking Maximus. He admits to being happy that his buddy Dane got hurt like he did. It admits to jealousy. The whole thank you spiel that he used at the end too, it felt like a last-ditch effort to save his own hide. And it worked. And he became Knight Titus's squire. I really was not happy about just how, underhanded this all seemed. At the 59-minute 30-second mark, they showed a junk launcher, which is nice. Just before this, though, as Knight Titus was boarding his vertibird, it seemed a bit unwise to me to knock signal the pilot to take off before the squire was even on board with the knight's gear. I'm all for portraying the knights as somewhat callous, but not unwise or stupid. Now, from this point in the episode to the end is effectually our introduction to Cooper, the ghoul. The tone here is a pretty hard swing from the sections featuring Lucy or Maximus. In those, we had good lighting, we had kind of the retro-futuristic setting, we had the vault and, the training camp. The retro-futuristic or dystopian world kind of presentation and style and tone of the overall presentation was consistent. But here, it was a darkened nighttime setting. The environs, the costuming of the characters, the dialectic choices of those characters involved, to say nothing of the old-fashioned coffin design that the ghoul was found to be in. This all introduces a play to kind of a dark or paranormal gunslinger western vibe. It was a little bit of a whiplash in terms of tone. As bad as the lighting was in the scene, though, I wasn't really able to make out too much of the details on the fringes. And that could be a facet of the fact that I was watching on my phone in the break room at work. So if that's on me, that's on me, and my apologies to the folks at Amazon Bethesda. Anyhow, the ghoul is clearly the cowboy actor from the show's opening, who indicated he had been a Marine at one point. With that background, as well as his long living as a ghoul, it makes him rather lethally efficient, and it makes his takedown of the guys who dig him up more than believable. But the sudden shift in tone and presentation visually was a little jarring, as in terms of a switch from the rest of the show leading up to that point. Overall, for episode 1, the purpose of a pilot episode for any series is to pique an audience's interest and to get them coming back for more. And the opening salvo hit the mark with rich aplomb, even if it didn't do so perfectly. Rather than using a sniper rifle, they hit the target with a flamethrower sweep, and things never come out evenly cooked with that kind of thing. But it did hook me in enough to want to continue watching the show. And so I did. And, and I continued to take notes throughout watching this series. And I'll get into those further notes, possibly. Or I will just do an overall synopsis next time. I'm going to actually leave that to you folks. That was just episode 1 that I took all of these notes and had all these observations regarding. And I don't want to necessarily take up more of anybody's time than they are willing or able to give. So I would like to leave it to you folks. And I ask you to let me know by way of comments. Would you like to hear the entirety of my notations from episode to episode? Or would you prefer I just move it along and get to my summary conclusions with regards to this show? There are a number of points during that conclusion summary I would touch upon, but rather than going through each and every observation, I would just summarize. I'm happy to do either or, but I leave it up to you, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I ask, as always, to take care of yourselves, and always remember, keep reading.